A quiet shift happens inside the body long before the mirror shows anything wrong. And that hidden change is what keeps stubborn fat locked in place, stresses the liver, and quietly pushes blood sugar higher day after day. But today's topic goes in the opposite direction because there is a simple powder that has been studied for its ability to support fat loss at the deepest level, not just surface weight. And it works in a way most people completely overlook, not by forcing the body, not by starving it, but by changing what happens right after you eat, the moment where most damage actually begins. And this is where things start to get interesting because this one small addition can influence how your body handles sugar, how your liver processes fat, and how your metabolism reacts to every meal you eat. And while it may sound like another trend at first, the mechanism behind it is grounded in real biology, in how your gut communicates with your hormones, in how insulin rises and falls, and in how fat gets stored or released. And once you understand that link, everything starts to make more sense, including why so many diets fail, even when people try hard and stay consistent. Because effort alone does not fix a metabolic problem. And that is exactly where this powder steps in. Quietly, without hype, without complexity, but with an effect that builds over time and starts showing changes where it matters most, deep inside the body where visceral fat forms around organs and creates risk that often goes unnoticed. And this is the kind of fat that does not just affect appearance but also interferes with energy levels, digestion, and long term health, especially when it starts affecting the liver, turning it sluggish and overloaded. And once the liver slows down, the entire system begins to struggle. Fat burning decreases, toxins build up, and blood sugar becomes harder to control. And that leads to a cycle that feels impossible to break. But this is where the story shifts because instead of pushing harder, instead of cutting more food, there is a smarter way to change how the body responds. And it starts in the gut, where this powder creates a simple but powerful effect that slows down how quickly sugar enters the bloodstream. And that one change alone can reduce sudden spikes, lower insulin response, and signal the body to stop storing excess fat, especially in the abdominal area. And when that process repeats consistently, meal after meal, day after day, the body begins to shift from storage mode into a more balanced state. And that is when visceral fat starts to shrink, not overnight, not instantly, but steadily in a way that lasts. And alongside that, the liver begins to get relief from constant overload, allowing it to process fat more efficiently and support overall metabolic health. And there are also reports and observations where people notice changes in their blood sugar levels sooner than expected, not because of magic, but because the spike that usually happens simply gets reduced at the source. And this is one of the most overlooked strategies because most approaches focus on reacting after blood sugar rises instead of preventing that rise in the first place. And that is why this topic matters, because it connects multiple problems to a single underlying cause and offers a simple way to influence it. And throughout this video, everything will be broken down step by step in a clear and practical way so you can understand exactly what this powder is, how it works inside the body, why it affects visceral fat differently from regular fat, how it supports liver function without complicated routines, and how it can play a role in stabilizing blood sugar when used correctly, along with what to expect, how to use it safely, and what mistakes to avoid so the results actually show up. And by the end, the goal is to give you a complete picture that removes confusion and replaces it with clarity. So you are not just following advice blindly, but actually understanding what is happening inside your body and why small changes can lead to big results over time. And this is the kind of knowledge that often gets ignored because it sounds too simple, but simple does not mean ineffective. It often means sustainable, and sustainable is what creates real change. So stay with this till the end because the details matter, the timing matters, and the way you apply it matters more than anything else. And once you see the full picture, it becomes much easier to take control instead of guessing what might work. Welcome to the channel where complex health ideas are made simple and practical. And if you want more content like this that helps you understand your body in a clear and honest way, Make sure to subscribe and stay connected for the next videos where small truths lead to real results. Most people still believe belly fat is only about eating too much food, as if the body is just a simple storage system that fills up when you overeat and empties when you eat less. But the truth goes deeper than that, and it explains why so many people struggle for years without real change. Because the real danger is not the fat you can pinch from the outside. It is the fat you cannot see, the fat that builds quietly inside the body, known as visceral fat. And this type of fat does not sit under the skin where it is easy to notice. Instead, it wraps itself around vital organs like the liver, the intestines, and even the pancreas. And once it starts building up, it changes how the body functions from the inside. It begins to slow down metabolism in subtle ways, not all at once, but gradually, making the body less efficient at burning energy and more likely to store it. And at the same time, it places extra pressure on the liver, which is already responsible for processing nutrients, breaking down toxins, and managing fat. So when this fat surrounds the liver, it interferes with those processes, causing the liver to become sluggish. And when the liver slows down, fat processing becomes inefficient, which leads to even more fat being stored instead of burned. And this creates a cycle that keeps repeating. And while all of this is happening internally, blood sugar levels also start to rise more easily. Not in a sudden, dramatic way that is easy to notice, but in small increases after every meal. And over time, those small increases begin to add up, creating a pattern where the body is constantly dealing with higher levels of sugar in the bloodstream, and that triggers more insulin release. And insulin is the hormone that tells the body to store fat. So the more often insulin rises, the more the body stays in storage mode. And this is why the problem becomes difficult to break, because it is not just about how much you eat. It is about how your body reacts to what you eat. And here is where it becomes even more concerning, because a person can look completely normal on the outside, not overweight, not visibly unhealthy, and still have a high level of visceral fat inside. And that is what makes it dangerous, because it hides in plain sight, giving a false sense of security while quietly affecting energy levels, digestion, and long-term health. And this is why so many people feel confused, because they try to fix the problem in ways that seem logical. They start dieting harder. They cut calories. They remove foods they enjoy. They try skipping meals thinking it will speed up fat loss. And for a short time, it may seem like something is happening, but then everything slows down. Progress stops, and frustration begins to build. And that is because these methods focus only on reducing food intake without addressing how the body processes that food, and when the metabolism is already affected by visceral fat and high insulin levels. Simply eating less does not solve the core issue. Instead, it can sometimes make the body more resistant, slowing metabolism further and increasing cravings, making it harder to stay consistent. And this leads to a cycle where effort increases but results decrease. And that is where many people lose motivation, not because they are not trying, but because they are trying in a way that does not match how the body actually works. And this is the key point that changes everything, because this is not just a calorie problem, it is a metabolic problem. It is about how the body handles energy, how it responds to food, how hormones signal the body to either store or burn fat. And once you understand that, the approach begins to shift from forcing the body to cooperate to guiding it in a smarter way. And this is exactly where the simple powder comes into the picture, not as a shortcut or a quick fix, but as a tool that works with the body instead of against it. And what makes it interesting is that it does not act like a drug. It does not push the body into extreme changes. It does not artificially speed things up. And it is not marketed as a typical fat burner that promises fast results without explanation. In fact, it is something that has been around for a long time, often overlooked because of its simplicity. And that simplicity is exactly why it works in a consistent and sustainable way, because it starts in the gut. And the gut is where a large part of metabolic control begins, even though many people do not realize it. And inside the digestive system, there is a constant process of breaking down food, absorbing nutrients, and sending signals to the rest of the body. And those signals influence hunger, energy levels, fat storage, and even blood sugar control. So when something changes the way the gut handles food, it can create a ripple effect throughout the entire system. And this powder works right at that starting point, where food enters and begins to break down. And when it is taken before meals, it interacts with the contents of the gut in a very specific way, forming a soft gel-like layer that blends with the food. And this layer slows down how quickly nutrients, especially sugars, are absorbed into the bloodstream. And that one change has a powerful impact because it prevents the sudden spikes in blood sugar that usually happen after eating. And when those spikes are reduced, the body does not need to release large amounts of insulin. And when insulin stays lower and more stable, the signal to store fat becomes weaker, allowing the body to shift away from constant storage and toward a more balanced state. And this is where the process of fat reduction begins to change direction, especially for visceral fat, which is closely linked to insulin levels and metabolic activity. And instead of being locked in place, it becomes easier for the body to access and use that stored fat as energy. And over time, this leads to a gradual reduction in the fat that surrounds organs. And that is important because it directly affects how the body functions, not just how it looks. And this process also gives the liver a chance to recover from constant overload. Because with fewer spikes in blood sugar, and less fat being pushed towards storage, the liver can begin to process fat more efficiently again, improving its overall function. And this creates another positive effect because a healthier liver supports better metabolism, which in turn supports further fat reduction, creating a cycle that works in the opposite direction from before. And all of this starts from a simple adjustment in how the body handles food at the very beginning of digestion. And that is why this approach feels different from typical methods, because it does not rely on extreme restriction or intense effort. It focuses on changing the internal response in a way that is easier to maintain over time. And while it may not feel dramatic at first, the impact builds with consistency, and that is what makes it effective for long term results. Because the body is not being forced into a temporary state, it is being guided toward a more stable and efficient way of functioning, and this is the shift that many people miss, the difference between fighting the body and working with it. And once that shift happens, progress becomes more predictable, more sustainable, and less dependent on constant struggle. And this is why understanding the role of this powder and how it works inside the body is important, because it connects the problem to a practical solution in a way that makes sense. And it shows that sometimes the most effective changes are not the most complicated ones, but the ones that address the root cause in a simple and consistent way, allowing the body to do what it is naturally designed to do when given the right conditions. Your liver works quietly in the background every single day, handling tasks most people never think about, breaking down nutrients, filtering what comes in, and deciding what gets used, what gets stored, and what gets cleared out. And in many ways, it acts like your body's central processing unit for fat and sugar, constantly balancing between storage and release depending on the signals it receives. But when too much pressure builds over time, especially from repeated spikes in blood sugar and constant fat intake, the liver begins to shift its behavior. Not because it wants to, but because it has no other choice. And instead of burning fat efficiently, it starts storing more of it, especially when insulin levels stay high and signals keep telling the body to hold on to energy rather than use it. And this is how fatty liver begins to develop slowly, often without clear symptoms at first, creating a situation where the liver becomes overloaded and less capable of doing its job properly. And once that overload reaches a certain point, it affects everything else. Metabolism slows down, energy levels drop, digestion feels heavier, and fat loss becomes harder even when effort stays high. And this is where a small but consistent change can begin to make a difference, because instead of adding more pressure, the goal becomes reducing the load the liver has to deal with after every meal. And this is where the role of this powder becomes more clear because it does not act directly on the liver in an aggressive way. It works earlier in the process, in the gut, where it changes how nutrients enter the system. And by slowing down the absorption of sugars and reducing sudden spikes in blood glucose, it lowers the demand placed on the liver to process excess energy all at once, and that gives the liver more space to handle what is already there, improving its ability to manage fat instead of simply storing it. And over time, this steady reduction in overload allows the liver to function more efficiently. And when the liver starts working better, the entire system begins to shift because now fat processing improves, storage signals weaken, and the body starts moving toward a more balanced state. And this is why the effect can feel gradual but meaningful, because it is not forcing a quick change, it is restoring a natural function that was being disrupted. And that is where the emotional shift happens as well. Because instead of feeling like the body is constantly holding on, resisting every effort, it begins to feel like it is finally cooperating, finally clearing instead of storing. And that subtle change builds confidence because it shows that progress is possible without extreme measures. And as this process continues, another important effect begins to show up, especially in how the body handles blood sugar. And this is where many people start to notice a difference sooner than expected, not in a dramatic or unrealistic way, but in a way that feels steady and noticeable. Because when the absorption of sugar is slowed down at the source, the usual spikes that happen after meals become smaller, smoother, and easier for the body to manage. And when those spikes are reduced, the need for large insulin responses also decreases. And that leads to a more stable pattern throughout the day. And while results can vary from person to person, some people do experience changes that feel relatively quick compared to other approaches, not because the body is being pushed into an extreme reaction, but because the problem is being addressed at its starting point. And that is why it is important to understand that this is not magic and not an instant fix for everyone, because the body still needs time to adapt and respond. But the difference is that the direction of change becomes more favorable from the very beginning. And that is often enough for people to feel encouraged to stay consistent. And the key idea here is simple. When the spike never happens in the first place, the entire chain reaction that follows becomes less intense, less damaging, and easier to manage. And this is a very different approach from trying to fix the problem after it has already occurred. And that is one of the reasons why this method often goes unnoticed, because it does not rely on dramatic claims or complex routines. It works quietly in the background. And in a world where attention is often drawn to the newest trends, the most expensive solutions, and the most complicated plans, something simple can easily be ignored. And this powder falls into that category because it is not flashy, it does not promise extreme results overnight, and it does not come with a complicated system that feels impressive at first glance. And that is exactly why many people never hear about it, because it is simple, it is accessible, and it does not sound exciting. But that simplicity is also what makes it sustainable. And sustainable is what leads to real results over time. And when something is easy to use and easy to maintain, it becomes part of a routine rather than a temporary effort. And that is where long term change begins to take shape. And this is why the way it is used also matters, because consistency plays a bigger role than intensity. And the general approach is straightforward, taking it before meals so it can interact with the food as it enters the digestive system, starting with a small amount so the body can adjust comfortably, and gradually building a routine that fits into daily life without creating stress or disruption. And this is important because more is not always better, and pushing too much too quickly can lead to discomfort or reduce the ability to stay consistent. And the goal here is not to force results, but to support the body in a way that it can handle over time, allowing natural processes to improve step by step. And when that approach is followed, the changes begin to build, not in a sudden dramatic way, but in small shifts that accumulate with each meal, with each day, creating a pattern that becomes stronger over time. And this is where expectations need to be clear, because this is not about melting fat overnight or seeing instant transformation. It is about changing what the body does repeatedly, how it reacts after every meal, how it manages sugar, how it processes fat. And those repeated actions are what shape long term results. And when each meal becomes an opportunity to support better metabolic function, instead of adding stress, the overall direction begins to change. And those small changes, though they may seem minor in the moment, start to add up faster than expected when they are consistent. And that is what makes this approach effective, not because it delivers quick excitement, but because it creates steady progress that builds over time. And that steady progress is what eventually leads to visible and lasting results without the constant struggle that often comes with more extreme methods. It all comes down to one simple shift that most people overlook, and once you understand it, everything starts to feel easier and more in control. Because it's not about eating less. It's about controlling what your body does with what you eat. It's about guiding your system instead of fighting it. And when that guidance is in place, the body begins to respond in a completely different way. The constant storage slows down, the pressure on your system starts to ease, and the changes you've been trying to force finally begin to happen naturally. And that's where the real transformation begins, not from extreme effort, but from smarter choices repeated consistently. And when your blood sugar stays stable throughout the day, when those sharp spikes are reduced and your body is no longer pushed into storage mode again and again, something powerful starts to happen quietly in the background. Your body stops holding on. It stops protecting excess fat and it begins to release it step by step, using it as energy the way it was always meant to. And that shift is what creates lasting results, the kind that don't disappear after a few weeks, the kind that build over time and stay with you. And that's why understanding this approach matters. Because once you see how small changes influence the bigger picture, it becomes easier to stay consistent without feeling overwhelmed. And consistency is what turns simple actions into real progress. So if this opened your eyes even a little and helped you understand your body in a clearer way, take a second to like this video so more people can discover it too. Subscribe to the channel for more simple and practical health truths that actually make sense in real life. And share this with someone who is struggling with belly fat or blood sugar and needs a smarter way forward. Because sometimes one small insight can change everything when it's applied the right way.